The American dream is dead. Its bloated carcass lies on an autopsy table, and there's only one suspect. In 1968, a minimum wage worker earning $1.60 an hour could buy a house 7.5 times their annual income. That is $14.90 an hour in today's dollars. Today, the federal minimum wage is $7.25, half of the 1968 value, and medium homes cost up to 6 times annual income. Even a master's or PhD can't afford rent. Those aren't numbers, they're evidence. I'm Josh, and on today's episode of the Infographics Show, we reveal how baby boomers blew up the American dream. Chapter 1. Follow the money. Let's start with the crime scene, the untouched version, the control group, the proof that the system worked before someone interfered. In 1976, a groundskeeper at UC Berkeley made minimum wage, or $2 an hour. He worked 12 weeks over the summer, or 480 hours, and nets $960. UC Berkeley's annual tuition that year, $637. He covers 150% of his tuition in one summer. He has $323 left over for, things like books, rent, living. That's the American dream in its purest form. A person with no degree, no connections, and no generational wealth, but a strong willingness to work, can pay for their education and still have enough left over to live a decent life. That groundskeeper in 2026? California minimum wage is now $16.90 per hour. The groundskeeper works the same number of hours. He earns just over $8,100. UC Berkeley's tuition, well, that'll cost you $14,200 for the year. His work has covered roughly 57% of tuition. He is over $6,100 short, and that's earning more than twice the federal minimum wage. At the federal rate of $7.25, he'd need to work nearly 2,000 hours, or 49 weeks of full-time labor just to break even on tuition alone. Did the groundskeeper get any lazier? Did the university get any better? Or did the numbers just get weaponized? Baby boomers represent 20% of today's U.S. population, yet they control $85 trillion in assets, 51.4% of all American wealth, 1/5 of the people, more than half of the money. Millennials, well, they're 21.8% of the population, almost the same size as the boomer generation, but they control just $18 trillion, about 10.3% of the nation's wealth. Let's make this more concrete. In 1989, households aged 70 held about 1/5 of the nation's wealth. That made sense. They'd worked their whole lives, they had saved. But by 2025, households over 70 control 32% of the wealth. That is a 63% increase in wealth concentration among the elderly in just 36 years. All the while, younger generations' share collapsed. So how did they do it? Stocks. Boomers own $25.15 trillion in equities, 54% of all publicly traded shares in America. Millennials own $3.9 trillion in stocks, just 8.2% of the market. Boomers control 6.5 times more equity wealth than millennials. Again, same population size. Nowhere is this clearer than in the realm of real estate. Boomers hold almost $19.7 trillion in property. Millennials hold around $9.8 trillion, exactly half. But remember, they are the same size generation. A recent post by Macro Edge highlighted the striking trend. From 1960 to 2025, the share of all 30-year-olds who are both married and homeowners fell from 52% to 12%. In other words, only about 1 in 8 30-year-olds today meet both criteria. It's a decline largely driven by fewer young people getting married, not just lower homeownership rates. The overall homeownership rate has actually risen from 62% in 1960 to 65% now. How is that possible? Boomers are buying multiple homes, second homes, investment properties, Airbnbs. The market isn't frozen, it's just locked into one generation. The discrepancy is not by accident. It's the outcome of a protectionist system that boomers themselves built. Still substantial, still comfortable. The average baby boomer has a net worth of about $1.6 million, with the median at $387,200. Comfortable and secure after decades of work. Gen X is behind with an average of about $976,000 and a median of $247,000, significantly less than the boomers. Millennials fall even further, averaging $366,000 with a median of just $87,300. That is roughly 1/5 of what the boomers hold. 3 generations, 1 ladder, and the people at the bottom are drowning. But here's the part that seals it: the testimony from a boomer dad that even they can't deny. For years, he'd lectured his son about looking way outside his means while house hunting. The son, fed up, issued a challenge for his dad to go find a house today at the price you think is fair for me. And the dad spent hours searching. He came back pale. "This isn't just expensive," he admitted. "It's impossible. You're playing a rigged game." The dad paid $25,000 for his first home in 1980. Adjusted for inflation, that is $93,000 in 2025 dollars. The median home price today is just under $417,000, 4.5 times more expensive, even after adjusting for inflation. He could afford it at his age, his son can't. Same work ethic, same country, different math. Another Redditor shared his grandfather's story. He bought a 6-bedroom home in 1970 for $40,000. It's worth $950,000 today. Adjusted for inflation, that $40,000 equals $333,000 in 2025 dollars. The house still costs $617,000 more than inflation alone would predict. That is not market dynamics, that's extortion. Defenders of the status quo love a particular rebuttal. Of course the boomers hold more wealth, they're older. That's just life cycle economics. And yes, wealth naturally rises with age. That part is true, but life cycle patterns don't explain how steep the curve became. Previous generations aged into wealth gradually. Boomers aged into asset hyperinflation. 1/5 of the population holding more than half of all the wealth isn't prosperity, it's hoarding. And what they hoarded, they took. From wages, housing, taxes, from pensions, from the future. They didn't merely get rich, they ensured no one else could either. And that's where the evidence trail leads next. Chapter 2. Housing, the ladder they pulled up. We have to look at the deliberate mechanics of the housing lockout to understand why the system was rigged by the boomers. In 1970, the median home cost 2.4 times the median household income. Not easy, sure, but achievable. You would work for a few years, save for a down payment, and then buy shelter for you and yours. In 2025, the median home cost 5.6 times the median household income. That is a 133% increase in the ratio. But that doesn't discriminate based on urban density. In cities where jobs actually exist, it is way worse. In San Jose, the heart of Silicon Valley, the median home costs 10.5 times the median household income. In Los Angeles, 12.5 times. In Miami, 8.7 times. A house in those places isn't really achievable to your average Joe. It's an inheritance lottery ticket or a perk reserved for the upper crust of society. The median age of a first-time homebuyer today, 40 years old. In 1980, it was 29. They're making people wait an extra decade of rent extraction before they can even access the market. But the crime also extends to the supply stranglehold. After the 1968 Fair Housing Act threatened to integrate white neighborhoods, suburbs responded with a wave of exclusionary zoning in the 1970s. Suddenly, 75% of residential land in American cities was zoned exclusively for single-family homes. Municipalities imposed minimum lot sizes, 3 to 10 acres in some places. It was designed to keep out anyone without substantial capital. Housing at the time started to be treated as a growth stock instead of a blue chip. It was an investment rather than a shelter. San Francisco's zoning restrictions alone inflate land prices by $400,000 per house. Now, 43% of baby boomers say they will never sell their home. Never. 56% have lived in their current home for over 10 years. Empty nester boomers own twice as many 3-bedroom plus homes as millennials with children. 3 in 10 large homes are occupied by empty nesters. Millennials with kids own just 14.2% of large homes. The math is suffocating. Only 25 out of every 1,000 homes changed hands in the first 8 months of 2024. It was the lowest turnover rate in decades. Between 1970 and 1980, when boomers needed homes, housing units increased 29%. Construction exploded to meet the demand. Post-2008, when millennials needed homes, construction collapsed. The baby boomers built the ladder when they needed it, then they voted for zoning laws and made sure that it couldn't be rebuilt. They're sitting in oversized homes that they refuse to sell even at extortionate prices, blocking supply and inflating prices. And somehow they're still blaming their children for not working hard enough. Chapter 3. The Degree Tax. Boomers didn't just lock the younger generations out of housing, they also made them pay for the privilege of competing. In 1981, a kid slinging chicken buckets at KFC made $3 an hour. It was fine, he could still go to college. Today, it's a whole different story. Wondering what changed? In the late 1960s and early 1970s, the Social Security Administration subsidized college for young adults with deceased, disabled, or retired parents. It was the equivalent of about $32,000 today. Since a lot of boomer parents had served in America's world wars, that federal program helped a lot of boomers go to college. It ended in the 1980s, so for those who could enjoy it, they got in. And then they closed the door. Federal subsidies went a long way at the time because college was far more affordable. Average public four-year tuition in 1963 to 64, adjusted for inflation, was just over $4,900. In 2022 to 2023, it had risen to just under $14,700. That is a 197% increase after inflation is already accounted for. The cost of college tripled in real purchasing power. Throughout the 1990s, colleges cost roughly 18% of one's median household income. Today, public university tuition costs about 35% of median income. Tuition has doubled over the span of 2 decades. Private universities today cost 137% of median income. That is more than an entire year's salary before taxes, naturally. In 1970, 250 hours of minimum wage work covered a year of public college tuition. By 2020, it took over 1,000 hours. At Penn State, it took 19 weeks of full-time work to pay off college tuition in 1985. But by 1995, the amount of time a student would have to work rose to 29 weeks. In 2014, it had skyrocketed to 57 weeks, exactly 3 times longer for the same degree at the same institution. Boomers attended college when taxpayers picked up most of the tab. Then they slashed public funding. The rest got dumped onto the students and their parents. It gets even worse. Federal student loan debt has more than doubled since 2007. Gen X carries the highest balances per borrower at roughly $44,300. Millennials aren't far behind, averaging about $40,400. Even baby boomers, the generation that largely attended college before student debt even existed as a mass phenomenon, averages $41,900 among those who still hold debt. But here's the asymmetry that matters. In 2021, only 6.6% of boomers carry student debt, compared to roughly 25.5% of millennials. Today, student debt for Gen X stands at about $600 billion. The boomers got subsidized education, then they cut the subsidies. They made degrees mandatory for a decent living, they made degrees cost more than your income, then they became the lenders. But surely they funded the government that could have helped, right? Chapter 4 – The Tax Heist. It's 1981 and President Ronald Reagan has just walked into the Oval Office with a plan. The top tax rate at the time, what the ultra-wealthy are paying, is sitting pretty at 70%. By the end of Reagan's first term, it'll be down to 50%. By the midterms of his second, 28%. They cut it in half and then in half again. It was called trickle-down economics. Except nothing trickled down but the bill. The national debt under Reagan tripled, going from $997 billion to $2.85 trillion. That's like maxing out 3 credit cards and telling your kids they'll figure it out. The federal deficit hit 6% of GDP. The government lost 9% of its entire revenue stream in the first few years. Reagan's tax cuts have added $10 trillion to the national deficit since being implemented in 1981. But there's more. When President George W. Bush came around in 2001, his tax cuts cost an estimated $1.7 trillion over 10 years. The top 1%, the hedge fund managers, the CEOs, got an average annual tax cut of $57,000 for doing nothing. By 2018, Bush's tax cuts were adding $500 billion to the deficit every year. Without those cuts and without the post-9/11 wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, the debt-to-GDP ratio would have stayed under 50%. Instead, it hit 70%. He basically financed 2 wars and a financial crisis on a credit card and then left it on the kitchen counter for the millennials to clean up. Then President Trump walked in like he was hosting The Apprentice. In 2017, his tax cuts added another $1 to $2 trillion to of the national debt. Back then, experts were projecting that within a decade, 83% of the benefits would be going to the top 1%. The corporate tax rates got slashed from 35% to 21% permanently. Meanwhile, your payroll taxes stayed roughly the same. Tax cuts didn't cause America's debt explosion on their own, but serious budget projections show that they probably account for tens of trillions of dollars, about a quarter to a third of today's debt relative to GDP. In other words, the debt crisis had many causes, but its rapid acceleration was largely driven by these policies. Since 1980, the national debt as a share of GDP has quadrupled. And in 2024, just paying the interest on that debt, $881 billion, will cost more than the entire defense budget. We're spending more on interest than on the actual military. That'd be like paying more for your credit card interest than your monthly rent. The generational scam rests in the fact that since the 1980s, the vast majority of all growth in domestic spending went to entitlement programs for seniors. The federal government typically spends $6 per senior for every $1 spent on a child. Americans over 65 now represent roughly 17% of the population, yet expenditures for Social Security and Medicare now dominate the federal budget. The rich cut their own taxes from 70% to 28%. They borrowed $20 trillion against the millennials' future and then called it prosperity. Then they handed them the bill with $881 billion to $1 trillion in annual interest. But don't worry, at least they're financially secure in retirement, right? Because they definitely didn't screw you there, too. Chapter 5: The Retirement Bait and Switch. Here's how pensions used to work. You'd show up, you do your job, and when you retire, your employer sends you a check every month until you die. It was called a defined benefit pension. The company took on the risk when they hired you, the company manages the investments, and you get guaranteed income for life. That's what boomers got. Sometime in the mid-1990s, something magical happened. Companies discovered they could just transfer all that risk onto you. Enter the 401k. You fund it, you manage it, you absorb the losses when the market crashes, and there is no guarantee you'll have anything when you retire. Depression-era babies, or the generation before the boomers, average $6,000 in pension income. Gen X, they'll average $2,000, one-third of that. Only 25% of Gen X will even have a pension. 80% will entirely rely on 401ks that they raided during emergencies. What's highway robbery is the fact that Gen X will need $1.1 million for a comfortable retirement. They're on track to have about $700,000. That's a $400,000 shortfall per person. And 24% of them have already borrowed from their 401k just to survive emergencies, debt, or rising costs. Meanwhile, only 40% of boomers have adequate retirement savings at all. More than half of them will run out of money. But here's the thing, they don't need savings. They have guaranteed Social Security and Medicare that you are funding through payroll taxes. Boomers retired with guaranteed pensions. Then they'll proceed to dismantle this pension system, and they told you to invest wisely in a 401k. Then they crashed the market in 2000 and again in 2008, and the people with guaranteed income eliminated it for everyone else. And now they're owed entitlements. Chapter 6: The Demographic Time Bomb and the Bill That Never Stops. Every single day, 10,000 baby boomers turn 65 and age into Medicare. Every single day. That's like filling a college football stadium every week with new retirees who need government health care. Here's the problem with that. Social Security and Medicare were designed when people lived shorter lives. The assumption was maybe they'd have 10 to 15 years of retirement. Boomers today, they're living 20 to 30 years plus after retirement. They're collecting benefits for twice as long as the system was designed to handle. The math, once again, is apocalyptic. The Medicare Trust Fund is predicted to go bankrupt by 2033, less than a decade away. Taxes will only cover 89% of scheduled Medicare benefits. A retired 65-year-old couple now faces $275,000 in out-of-pocket healthcare expenses. And that's not even including long-term care. Only 50% of boomers will be able to afford their own healthcare. But wait, you're thinking, won't they pass down their wealth to help? The great wealth transfer, right? $68 to $84 trillion supposedly coming to younger generations? The reality is that in 2024, 91 heirs inherited $297.8 billion. Most of it went to people who were already wealthy. Middle-class inheritance? Obliterated by healthcare costs. Again, just 40% of boomers have adequate retirement savings, which means they'll be burning through assets just to stay alive. So now let's talk about those healthcare costs. In 1970, total U.S. healthcare spending was $74.1 billion. By 2024, it was up to $5.3 trillion. Healthcare is now 18% of our entire GDP. Per capita spending went from $353 per year in 1970 to around $15,500 in 2024, a seven-fold increase in real terms. Your health insurance premiums are up 342% since 1999. Your wages up only 119%. You're paying way more for worse coverage while hospital prices have doubled since 2006. And here is the political lock. Boomers are the largest voting bloc. They actually show up to vote. Social Security and Medicare are politically untouchable. The Congressional Budget Office admits revenues aren't sufficient to cover the costs. Basically, they voted themselves benefits designed for 10 to 15-year retirements, they underfunded the system while cutting their own taxes, and millennials, their kids, and their grandkids will be paying for it forever. So where does that leave you? Chapter 7. Why you're broke and will stay broke. Well, let's tally up the damage. Minimum wage today is worth only half of what it was in 1968. Housing costs are 133% higher relative to income. College is nearly triple what it was after adjusting for inflation. Pensions have disappeared. Taxes on the wealthy have been cut from 70% to 37%. The national debt is over $38 trillion and still climbing. More than half of Americans live paycheck to paycheck. It is a grim picture, but it wasn't by accident. It wasn't down to millennials' undying love for avocado toast. This was a systemic dismantling executed by the baby boomers, the generation that climbed the ladder and then torched it behind them. They bought their homes at 3 times their income and made them cost 5.6 times. They got education at 18% of income and made it exorbitant. They had pensions guaranteed and eliminated them. They cut their taxes and exploded the debt. They voted for restrictive zoning and locked in untouchable entitlements. Every policy benefited them, every cost was pushed to the ones they'll leave behind. The American dream didn't die of natural causes, it was murdered by the boomers. And they're still holding the murder weapon. 51% of all American wealth. What happens to the world they leave behind? Find out in This Will Happen After Baby Boomer Generation Dies Off, or click on this video instead.